This story is not about me, but it's about my father. In 1975, my dad was 11 years old and living in Leeds with his mother and stepfather. And for some pocket money, he would do a paper route every morning, very early. He left the house in the dark, being it was October, it was still dark as usual, and went to collect the papers. Setting off to take his usual route through some playing fields, essentially a public park, but not very well kept one. But this morning was a particularly dark and gloomy one, and as he approached the shortcut he usually took, there seemed to be something off about it. So much that it genuinely freaked him out. It freaked him out just to be there. He decided to take his time and go the long way around, just to avoid the park. And he thought nothing of it for the rest of the morning. When he got to school after his paper route, everyone was freaked out. And upon asking his friends what was going on, they told him that this woman had been murdered with a hammer and stabbed in the neck earlier that morning in the same playing fields that he decided not to go through, and on the same pathway too. Probably just a major coincidence, but a very lucky one at that, because the time he was on his route was the apparent time that the crime was happening. This turned out to be the first of 13 gruesome murders committed by the notorious Peter Sutcliffe, who's also known as the Yorkshire Ripper. I'm glad my father didn't go that way that morning. I work overnight shifts at my job, and tonight just happened to be my night off. So I stayed up and got ready for the next night. It was about 1 a.m. and one of my friends who lives a town over from me hit me up on Snapchat and said he just got off of work. He asked me what I was doing. I told him I was just going to stay up and stay at home, but I was getting hungry and I was going to see what was on DoorDash. He told me he was going to do the same. I opened DoorDash and saw that the only things that were open were McDonald's, White Castle, and Taco Bell. I decided to try Taco Bell this time since usually they weren't open this late, and I guess they finally hired enough staff to work the closing shift. I ordered the grilled cheese burrito box. In about 5 minutes of us waiting on my order, was finally accepted by the dasher, which is usually pretty quick at this time of night around there. My friend texted me back on Snapchat and said that he not only ordered the same thing that I did, but the same dasher I had also picked up his order. Our dasher would be going to my friend first though. So my friend and I were feeling a little silly, so we got an idea. We both have doorbell cameras and we plan to greet her through the microphone with our secret greeting. "How do you like that, Goose?" So she get confused with my friend at first, but when I said it at my place, she figured out her customers are friends in real life. Taco Bell made our orders pretty fast, and in 10 minutes, our dasher was headed to us. After my friend's order was dropped off, he sent me the ring video. Our dasher was a middle-aged white lady in an orange sweatshirt with short, slightly uncombed dark hair and wore glasses. She looked like a substitute teacher who got out of a hard day of work. I heard my friend asking her, "How do you like that, Goose?" She looked confused at first and replied, "That what?" My friend replied and the video glitched, and I didn't hear what he said, and all I heard was the dasher unenthusiastically chuckle lightly and say, "You're welcome," and walk off screen after she left his food. I assumed our dasher was one to take a joke, so I already knew what to expect. So I kept opening and closing my DoorDash app every few seconds, watching her advance on the map while messaging my friend. However, my friend was not messaging me. When she was on my street, I got my Ring app ready. Now I live in a townhome, and my bedroom is on the second floor, on the same side as the front door. So I have no garage, and my street is just a parking lot that just leads to a dead end. I watch as a white beat-up Volkswagen blasting loud music drives past my house and parks a few spaces down. But my dasher took about 2 minutes to get out of her car after she turned it off. I found that a little odd, as all I ordered was a grilled cheese burrito box and nothing else. Then I saw her walk up, and she was putting the order down. I asked her, through the camera, "How do you like that, Goose?" She just looked up at the camera and stared for a second, and smiled and then laughed. She paused and said, "Oh, you know, a broken neck." That caught me off guard, so I just froze and just thought of the best way to finish it up. "Okay then, have a good night." As soon as I saw her walk out of sight, I ran downstairs and I grabbed my food. As I opened the door, however, I saw the same Volkswagen had moved a few spaces over, just right next to my car and in front of my door. I saw this and I immediately grabbed my food and shut the door. Not even 5 minutes after getting back upstairs, I start eating my food and I hear some angry shouting outside in the parking lot. I recognized the voice to be from my dasher, so I put my food down and I peeked out my window. I really wish I didn't, because the shouting stopped and I saw her standing there looking right up at me with this cold blank stare and her hands to her side. Good thing I was staying up all night, because that was the scariest shit I'd seen. I turned out all the lights upstairs and I waited. I wasn't too worried about her trying to hurt me because I'm a pretty big guy. It could probably take her if it came down to it. But instead, I guess I was a little naive and texted the dasher trying to explain to her that it was all just a joke, if that's what she's upset about, and didn't want any trouble. But I got no response. I was relieved when I heard her car start up and play loud music and then drove off. My friend then texted me and I told him everything that happened, and he told me that she did the same thing and started shouting random incoherent things in his driveway until one of his neighbors came outside to confront her, and that they were calling the police. And they came to check on my friend to see if he was okay, which is why he took so long to get back to me. I did reach out to DoorDash customer service and complained about her odd behavior, but besides getting refunded for my cold food and my chalupa having the wrong meat, I didn't hear if she was dealt with. I honestly have no idea if she was just having a bad day or on drugs, or just one of the crazy people who comes out during the witching hour. But after looking into that scary cold gaze of hers, I think I'm gonna leave my DoorDashers alone on the doorbell camera, especially after hours. The story takes place in 1977. My brother was little at the time and had been at a friend's house. I don't remember what the occasion was, but my parents were picking him up. It was late at night in the winter. My parents picked my brother up, load him into the car, and they start driving home. As they were leaving the neighborhood to get to the main road, they see a man come out of the woods with a shotgun, and he got into his van on the side of the road. Now, the area I grew up in was pretty suburban, but folks can be rather redneck. Seeing someone come out of the woods with a shotgun is worrisome, but usually it just means it was a poacher. So Dad, he keeps driving. The man gets into his car and follows my parents into the main road. Still nothing to be worried about. They make a few turns on the way home and it becomes increasingly obvious that the van was actually following them. They pull into the housing plan that we lived in, which was mostly new construction. The van pulls into the plan behind them. At the time, our house was the only finished, occupied house on our street. It was actually a cul-de-sac. The street lights haven't even been turned on yet, so it was pitch black. Winter, cold, and isolated. The van pulls into our driveway behind my dad. Dad gets out of the car, sends Mom and my brother into the house, and tells them to lock the door. He waits till they get inside, then he walks up to the van. He stands at the nose of the car, and he just stares at the man inside. He waits. No questions, no bravado, no nothing. He just stands there and he waits. Very intimidating. Now, what you need to know about my father at the time: he had a full ride scholarship for football in college. Dropped out and decided it would be fun to join the military and volunteered to go to Vietnam instead, because he was bored. He spent a year on some godforsaken little island at a ranger camp. He's an intimidating man, and always has been. Without being overly tall or large, he has a presence. You just don't want to mess with him. He is now much older and somewhat overweight, but in 1977, he must have been something because, without any words being exchanged, the man put his van into reverse and just drove away. The story doesn't end there though. The next morning, it was all over the news. A man had been murdered the night before in the housing plan my parents picked my brother up from. Just a street away, a man had been shot through his living room window with a shotgun. He died on the floor while his wife tried to run away, and his kids were asleep upstairs. The wife led the man through the woods on a chase. They found her body a few hours later in the woods, the same area where my family saw that man come out. It turns out it was Edward Surratt. He was a serial killer, and that was the man that my father encountered that night. My dad used to tell me this story, although I didn't know the grisly details until I was older. It was one of those listen to your gut lessons. It was in a small town in Indiana, early to mid 1970s. My dad is in middle school, early high school age. His house was about 6 or 7 blocks from the school, so when the weather was nice, he would walk home from school. One day on his walk home, he noticed a guy in a van driving by him slowly. It was a bit strange, but he thought nothing of it. Then it happened again and again. Eventually, the guy driving the van started yelling things at him, usually asking him to buy drugs. This is when my dad recognized the guy as Roger. Roger was about 9 years older than my dad, but my dad was friends with one of Roger's relatives, so he knew who he was. Anyway, the cycle of Roger following my dad for blocks as he walked home and asking him to buy drugs continued for who knows how long. My dad always got this gut feeling that something was deeply off about Roger. He was so afraid that when Roger yelled, he wouldn't even respond. He just stared at the ground until he reached his house. The walks must have seemed like they took forever. My dad was one of those kids who seemed to grow a foot taller over one summer, so he isn't sure if Roger stopped because my dad became more physically intimidating or he just moved on. But either way, he was glad when interactions stopped. But fast forward to Valentine's Day 1977. In a different town, still small and remote, a woman is at home with her son and 3 stepsons. Roger and 3 other men break into her home with shotguns and force her and her boys to lie face down on the floor. Roger and the gang threaten and taunt them for hours before shooting them one by one. One of the shots partially blew off the wig that the mother was wearing. Roger thought her skull was blown off and he assumed that she was dead, so he stopped shooting her. She survived and later described hearing a horrible noise as she lay there, and then realizing that she was hearing the blood drain from her son and stepsons. She described it as almost like a waterfall. Roger and his gang got away with about $40, but it was never about robbery. It was about the thrill of taking a human life. The mother eventually identified Roger and the 3 other men as the perpetrators, with Roger being the ringleader. Indiana didn't have the death penalty at the time, so each man was sentenced to multiple life sentences. But Roger, he recently died in prison. I know that it's unlikely that my dad would have been murdered by Roger had he gotten in the van or brought drugs from him. But the fact that he was so close so often to someone who was capable of doing something like that is very unsettling. When I was about 6 years old, I was over at my uncle's house with him and his girlfriend. He decided he was going to go grab some things at the store. And being a hot summer day, I stayed at his place watching some Disney movie while his girlfriend hopped in the shower. For some context, my uncle lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment. The layout went like this: living room, dining room / kitchen attached to the balcony, and his room and bathroom were in the back. While watching the movie, I peered up and I saw a woman approach through the kitchen. She had long dark hair and looked super pale. She walked out of the kitchen toward the balcony. As she was walking, she stopped and turned her head to me and gave me a stone-cold stare of intimidation. She got to the balcony door and just vanished. Being a 6-year-old who didn't know who that was or what was happening, I screamed at the top of my lungs. My auntie rushed out from her shower to find me crying. When my uncle came back, we explained what happened, and he called my grandparents, who stayed in the same apartment complexes. They came over and prayed for me. But the thing is, in my life, I've seen that same exact woman, ghost, spirit, whatever you want to call her. I've seen her about 3 times. I don't know if she's haunting me or watching over me, but every time I've seen her, I don't feel safe. I had just moved into my first apartment, and I was in the process of unpacking. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. So I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back toward me and his head to his chest. So I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up my phone and said, "Sorry, my phone, I'm just going to take a shower and call you back." The bathroom was right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, and I quietly locked the door, turned on the shower, jumped out my window, which my apartment's on the first floor, and I called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone comes out the door of the apartment complex. This was during the summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window in the entry door. I called my boyfriend and he came to me just before the police did. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired looking man. His eyes looked crazy. He didn't even try to get away. I was a mess and shivering and crying. But that cop told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept into my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be some homeless person and was placed into a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the next day. Luckily, nothing happened. When I was 13, I was walking home from school. It was a Friday and both my parents were working, and my brother was still at school. It started to rain and I had no umbrella. The next thing I knew, a car came along and slowed down. The driver was a guy in his early 30s, and he said, "Hey Elaine, jump in. I'll give you a lift." I told him my name wasn't Elaine. He apologized and he said I looked like this girl named Elaine, and offered to give me a lift anyway. I knew this was dodgy, so I said, "No thanks, my house is just right there." And I pointed to a random house nearby. Then I quickly walked into the entrance of the house and hid there for a few minutes, waiting for him to leave. When I walked back out, I realized that he had just pulled over on the side of the road and was getting out of his car. He knew it wasn't my house. I dropped my school bag and I just took off running. He followed me. I ran all the way to my house when I remembered I didn't have my keys and nobody was home. I was absolutely terrified. I started banging on the front door and all of a sudden it opened. My brother was standing there. He had stayed home sick from school that day. I was crying so much that I could barely talk and I just kept pointing at the man coming up the road. My brother grabbed a baseball bat and ran outside. As soon as the man saw my brother, He ran back to his car and jumped in and sped off. We didn't manage to get his license plate number, so he was never found. But I'm sure he wanted to kidnap me and possibly hurt or kill me. It was very scary, and I was so lucky that my brother was there. Or I might have just become another statistic. I used to work at a Boy Scout summer camp. Every week I had to take a big group of campers to a secluded spot for their wilderness survival badge, where they had to build shelter out of sticks and leaves and sleep in it overnight. The spot was only about a half a mile from the main camp, but we took them on a crazy route that made it seem really secluded. Anyways, on this one night, all the campers had made their shelters. We had cooked dinner, and we're all just sitting around the campfire. It was getting late, maybe about 11 p.m. So I sent all the campers to their shelters for the night and started cleaning up the fire. That's when we heard in the distance what sounded like church bells. They were pretty faint, but myself and my fellow staffers could definitely hear them. They went on for about 30 minutes on and off, ringing every 30 seconds. We were all freaked out, as there were no churches or towns within 20 miles of us. After the bells stopped, the singing started. It was too faint to hear the words, but it sounded like church choir music. But it was a lot of people, a lot more enthusiastic. Also, it was almost midnight at this point. The singing went on for well over an hour, sometimes quieting down until we almost couldn't hear it, sometimes getting so loud we thought it was getting closer. All of the campers were super freaked out, but I lied to them, telling them that there was a church service going on in camp and that there was nothing to be afraid of. Eventually, almost at 1 a.m., the singing stopped. Found out a few days later that there had been a large KKK rally only a few miles away that night, and that's actually what we heard. A few years ago, I went on vacation on one of the islands. It wasn't my first visit there, as I had worked there previously within the culinary industry. I never had any terrible encounters with anyone up until my vacation. I had just left my job and I needed a mini getaway before going back job hunting. So I booked a stay at a small hotel to relax and unwind alone, which was supposed to be about 10 days. On the second day, I decided to go and venture out into a new area to do some shopping and visit a new restaurant. I usually felt comfortable doing this, as I stated that I never had any negative experience before. To my surprise, there was this guy lurking on the sidewalk, but I didn't pay him any attention. I'm a very petite and reserved lady, so when he hollered, I responded by saying hi, and I kept on my journey. I'm not the type to make small talk, as I'm very skeptical of people. Apparently, he didn't like that. He must have preferred that if I stuck around, I might as well socialize with him. I guess he had other plans in mind. Anyway, I forgot about him, and on my return, he was still there. This time, he wasn't as perky as before. He kept hurling insults and decided to follow me. This complete stranger was literally speed walking behind me and trying his best to embarrass me. At this point, I'm petrified and shaken. Our room was located on the first floor of the hotel, which had me so paranoid that this lunatic would attack me. That night, I never slept a wink. I called my mother back at home, and she advised me to change my flight and come home. I considered it, but I thought that I would let this psychopath win if I ran off. I decided to stay a bit longer. On the third day, I went into the city to go into some different restaurants and do some more shopping. On the fourth day, there he was, loitering in his usual spot on the sidewalk. As soon as he saw me, he yelled that he should do something nasty to me for ignoring him, among other threats. I didn't respond, and just kept ignoring him. I felt so sick and I just wanted to vomit. What he said still haunts me to this day, but I'm not going to go into what he said because it was pretty graphic. I can't believe someone could be so disgusting. Anyway, when I got home, I called a friend to stay the night with me, and he did. I felt way better, but I was still paranoid. When I had to go out the next day, I prayed to God that I wouldn't see that guy again. Luckily for me, I didn't, and I enjoyed my full stay. I didn't know if he got arrested or whatever happened to him, but I was grateful I never saw him again. When I was younger, we had quite a large house. It was shaped like an L. But the L was cut into a hill, so the bottom part of that L had a downstairs, which was almost underground. It had windows facing out, but a lot was either in the hill or under another floor. I had the room from the bottom part of the L from the age of 13 and up. My room had 2 doors, one that opened out to kind of the rumpus room, and the one to the en-suite. It was always creepy as shit. But being a skeptic, I dared anything there to do something to me. So anyways, I grew up fine, but I could never sleep unless both doors were shut. When my parents went away, I'd break the rules and bring my dog in to sleep on my bed. I woke up a few times late to see her alert and staring at the door to the rumpus room. Occasionally, I'd hear clawing at the screen of the window, but we had dogs, cats, horses, and local bush turkeys, foxes, etc. I figured if something was there, that shouldn't have been my dogs. So fast forward 5 years, I bring a new girlfriend to my home to meet my parents. She slept in my old room and she woke up screaming between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. twice out of the 3 nights that we stayed there. I've been with her for 5 years since, and it's only happened in that room. She won't sleep in that house anymore. My parents let my younger sister move into the room about 4 years ago. She asked me recently if I ever heard scratching on the window late at night. Both of the dogs we had, plus the cat and the horses, are all dead. It being roughly 10 years later, so the scratching is likely independent of the pets, unless the local animals are messing with us. She also said that she can't sleep unless both doors are shut, and she'll often put door stops under both doors, so if she hears it, either of the doors open. She Googled some stuff and decided to sage the room and said she's had hectic nightmares since and woke up screaming late at night a few times. For reference, she was about 14 when the night terrors happened with my girlfriend, so we never told her. As I said, I'm a skeptic, but it's still pretty creepy.
Nightmare Files.